Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Archives. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. This is one of those stories that sounds simple at first, almost like a campfire tale. But the longer you sit with it, the more it crawls into your head. It was told to me as something that happened some time ago, and it was always told the same way, calmly, without exaggeration, which somehow made it worse. There were 3 teenagers who lived in a small town surrounded by woods, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and where there are certain locations adults warn kids about without ever fully explaining why. One of those places was an old cabin deep in the forest. People said it was dangerous, some said it was cursed. Others just said it wasn't safe and that no one should go there, especially at night. Naturally, that made it irresistible. The 3 of them were the kind of teens who thought fear was something you proved you didn't have. They were adventurous, bored, and convinced that adults exaggerated everything. They had heard the warnings their whole lives, and none of them could remember anyone actually explaining what was wrong with the cabin. So they decided to go there and spend the night, just to prove it was nothing. They didn't tell anyone where they were going. By the time they reached the cabin, it was already dark. The woods were quiet in that unnatural way forests get at night, where every sound feels isolated and important. The cabin sat alone, old and weathered, barely visible between the trees. The windows were dark. The door creaked when they pushed it open. Inside, it smelled like dust and rot. They turned on their flashlights and started looking around. The place was mostly empty. No furniture worth mentioning. Just bare wooden floors, walls, and the feeling that the cabin had been abandoned for a very long time. Then they noticed something strange. The walls were covered in pictures. They weren't framed nicely or hung evenly. They were scattered, nailed, or pinned directly into the wood. Every picture showed an old person, extremely old. Wrinkled faces, hollow eyes. Some of them looked sick, some looked angry, some looked like they were staring directly at whoever stood in front of them. The pictures were unsettling, but none of the teens wanted to admit that. Instead, they laughed. They made jokes about how creepy the people looked. They exaggerated the faces, mocked the expressions, and dared each other to stand closer. It was easier to make fun of the pictures than to acknowledge how uncomfortable they felt. Humor became a shield. If you laugh at something, it can't scare you. At least, that's what they believed. After a while, the tension faded. They ate the snacks they brought, talked about random things, and eventually decided to sleep. They laid out sleeping bags on the floor. The flashlights were turned off one by one until the cabin was swallowed by darkness. The night passed without anything obvious happening. No screams, no footsteps, no strange sounds that anyone could clearly remember afterward. Just sleep. In the morning, the guy who later told the story woke up first. For a few seconds, he didn't move. That moment between sleep and waking felt strange, like the air itself was heavier. Then he sat up and looked around. One of his friends was gone. At first, he assumed the guy had gone outside to use the bathroom or mess around. But the cabin door was still closed. There were no sounds outside, no movement, just silence. He turned to look at the 3rd friend. That's when panic started to creep in. The 3rd teen was sitting upright, eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't reacting. His face was completely blank, like something had been turned off inside him. The guy called his name. No response. He shook him gently. Nothing. It was like his friend was awake but not there. Heart pounding, he looked around the cabin again, trying to ground himself, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when he noticed the walls. The pictures were gone. Every single one. In their place were windows, not broken through holes or boarded up sections. Actual windows. Old, dusty, but unmistakably windows. Windows that hadn't been there the night before. Windows that looked out into the woods from every side of the cabin. He stood there, frozen, staring at them, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. He knew those had been pictures. He remembered laughing at them, remembered pointing at them, remembered the faces. Now there were only windows, all of them dark, all of them looking out into the forest. The realization hit him slowly and all at once. They hadn't been pictures of old people. They had been views. Views from inside the cabin, looking out. And whatever had been looking in during the night was no longer there. He grabbed his things, tried one last time to get a reaction from his unmoving friend, and then ran. He ran out of the cabin, through the woods, not caring about direction, branches tearing at his skin, lungs burning. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the forest. The missing friend was never found. The one who had been sitting upright with his eyes open never spoke again. He was alive. But whatever part of him made him who he was never came back. Doctors couldn't explain it. They said it was trauma, shock, something psychological. The guy who ran never went back into the woods. People still talk about the cabin. Some say it isn't there anymore, others say it is, but only if you're looking for it. Adults still warn kids not to go near it, and kids still laugh and roll their eyes. But the warnings don't come with explanations. They never do. When I was a kid, sometime in the early 1990s, I lived in a small town in the Northeast. It was one of those towns where nothing ever really happened, where people left their doors unlocked, where kids rode bikes until it got dark, and where parents felt safe letting their children roam as long as they stayed close enough. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, and behind our property was a huge stretch of woods and conservation land that felt endless when you were young. Trees, trails, thick brush, and patches where the sunlight barely reached the ground. To us, it was freedom. There were usually 5 or 6 of us, all between 12 and 15 years old. We were the kind of group that was always together. If we weren't at school or asleep, we were hanging out. In the summer, that meant pools, bikes, and wandering through the woods behind our houses. In the colder months, it meant the same thing, just with jackets and muddy boots. Those woods were our place. We knew the trails, the fallen trees, the little clearings where we would sit and talk about nothing and everything at the same time. We had boundaries, even if they were unspoken. There were places we went all the time and places we didn't. Not because anyone told us not to, but because kids develop their own invisible maps. Beyond a certain point, the woods felt different, quieter, thicker, less familiar. Most days we stayed where we felt comfortable. One afternoon, bored and feeling a little adventurous, we decided to go farther than we normally did. There wasn't a big discussion about it. Someone just said, "Let's see what's past this trail," and that was enough. We pushed deeper into the woods, laughing, talking, snapping sticks under our feet. It felt exciting, like we were explorers discovering something new. That's when we saw it. At first, it didn't make sense. Between the trees, in a small clearing, was a teepee, a real one. Not something made by kids with sticks and blankets, but an actual structure. The poles were tall and arranged properly, and the covering looked weathered, like it had been there for a while. We all stopped at the same time, staring at it. Our first reaction wasn't fear, it was curiosity. We had never seen anything like that in those woods. This wasn't a campground. This wasn't a park. This was conservation land. No one was supposed to be living out there. We whispered to each other, trying to figure out who it could belong to. A hunter? Someone camping illegally? Some weird survivalist? None of us really knew. Being kids, curiosity won. We approached the campsite slowly. Around the teepee were signs that someone had been living there. There were clothes, folded and unfolded, a cot inside the teepee, coolers, some empty, some with old food wrappers, trash scattered around, like whoever was staying there didn't care much about being neat. It didn't look abandoned. It looked used. That's when we heard a dog bark. It came from deeper in the woods, off to the side of the clearing. It wasn't close enough to see, but it was close enough to be loud. The bark echoed through the trees, sharp and sudden, and it snapped us out of our curiosity instantly. We didn't stop to think. We ran. We tore through the woods as fast as we could, branches slapping at our arms, feet sliding on leaves and dirt. No one spoke. No one laughed. That playful, adventurous feeling was gone in a second, replaced by pure instinct. We didn't stop until we were back in familiar territory, near our houses, gasping for breath and trying to calm down. For a while after that, the teepee became a story we talked about, but didn't act on. We joked about it, tried to scare each other with theories, but none of us wanted to go back right away. Still, curiosity has a way of coming back, especially in kids who think they're braver than they are. A few weeks later, we decided to check again. We told ourselves it was probably nothing. Maybe whoever had been there had moved on. Maybe it was just some harmless person camping out. We walked back into the woods, following the same path we had taken before. The closer we got, the quieter we became. The woods felt heavier this time, like they were watching us. The teepee was still there. That alone made my stomach drop. Part of me had hoped it would be gone, that the whole thing would end there. But it wasn't gone. It looked exactly the same as before. Then we saw the tree. Hanging from one of the branches was a dog's head. It took a second for my brain to understand what I was looking at. It didn't register right away. It was just a shape, something out of place. And then it clicked. I don't remember screaming, but I know we were all yelling. Panic hit all of us at once. This wasn't weird anymore. This wasn't creepy curiosity. This was something deeply wrong. We ran again, harder than before. We sprinted straight to my house, sobbing, shouting, barely able to form words. When my dad saw us, he knew immediately that something was seriously wrong. My dad was the chief of police at the time, and he had seen plenty in his career, but seeing a group of kids in that state stopped him cold. We tried to explain what we had seen, all of us talking at once, crying, shaking. It probably sounded like nonsense at first. A teepee, a dog, the woods. But once he managed to piece it together, his expression changed completely. He didn't hesitate. He called the station immediately. Police officers arrived and went into the woods. They searched the area thoroughly. They took pictures. They documented everything. The teepee was taken down. The campsite was cleared. From what we were told later, it was treated very seriously. No one brushed it off as a prank or kids exaggerating. After that, things felt quiet again. Too quiet. The campsite was gone. The clearing looked empty, like nothing had ever been there. We went back once, stupidly curious, and saw nothing. Just trees and dirt. If you hadn't known what had been there before, you never would have guessed. We thought it was over. The next weekend, my parents and I went on vacation. I remember being relieved to get out of town, to put some distance between myself and those woods. I didn't realize how close things still were to getting worse. While we were away, my dad got a frantic call from the station. A woman, accompanied by a pack of dogs, had chased one of my friends through the woods. My friend had been walking near the edge of the woods, behind our houses, when she appeared. He didn't know where she came from. He just heard dogs, saw movement, and suddenly he was being chased. He ran as fast as he could straight into my backyard. He hid in my shed and called his dad, terrified. His dad called the police. The police called my dad. Our vacation ended immediately. We went home and everything unfolded quickly after that. The woman was arrested. The dogs were taken by animal control. From what we were told, she was connected to the campsite. She had been living in the woods with the dogs, unnoticed, right behind our homes. I don't know all the details of who she was or why she was there. As kids, we weren't told everything, and as adults, some things are probably better left unknown. What mattered was that she had been there the whole time, watching, living close enough to hear us laughing, yelling, playing in the woods. After that, we didn't hang out in the woods much anymore. The place that had once felt like freedom suddenly felt dangerous. Every tree looked like a hiding place. Every sound felt like a warning. Parents were stricter. Boundaries were spoken out loud instead of assumed. Childhood innocence cracked a little that year. Even now, decades later, that story still sticks with me. Not because of monsters or ghosts, but because of how real it was, how close it was, how easily it could have gone worse. We weren't supposed to find that campsite. We weren't supposed to see what we saw, but we did. And once you realize that something like that can exist just beyond the edge of your normal life, it changes the way you see the world. It teaches you that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides quietly, just out of sight, waiting for someone curious enough to wander a little too far. My brother used to live in Duluth with his girlfriend at the time, and this happened back when they were still together. It's one of those stories that doesn't sound supernatural or unbelievable, but the more you think about it, the more it makes your stomach tighten. It's frightening not because of what definitely happened, but because of what almost did. My brother has always been into photography, not casually either. He's the kind of person who will drive out of his way, wait for the right light, and stand alone in uncomfortable places just to get the shot he wants. When they lived in Duluth, they'd often go out around sunset or late at night so he could take photos. The city has a certain atmosphere after dark, especially near the water and the old industrial areas. It can be beautiful, but it can also feel isolated and eerie, especially once most people have gone home. On this particular night, it was late. Around 11 or maybe closer to midnight, my brother wanted to photograph a bridge that was tucked away from the main roads, not somewhere tourists usually went. It wasn't completely unknown, but it was far enough from busy areas that you wouldn't expect many people there at that hour. When they arrived, his girlfriend immediately felt uneasy. She didn't like the location. Something about it felt wrong to her, and she told him she didn't want to get out of the car. My brother, focused on his photos and assuming it would only take a few minutes, told her that was fine. She stayed in the passenger seat while he grabbed his camera and headed off toward the bridge. The parking lot was mostly empty. There was only one other car there, a white Honda Civic. It was parked a short distance away, not close enough to feel like. She noticed his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. That detail stuck with her. People don't grip a steering wheel like that unless they're extremely tense, angry, or focused on something in a way that isn't normal. She tried to rationalize it. Duluth, like many cities, has areas where drug use is common, especially late at night. She assumed he might be high, tweaking, or having some kind of episode. It wasn't comforting, but it was an explanation that let her stay calm. She looked away and tried to focus on her phone, telling herself my brother would be back soon. Minutes passed. She checked the time, glanced toward where my brother had gone, then looked back at the Civic. The man was still there, still staring forward, still not moving. That's when her unease started to turn into real fear. Then she heard a car door open. The sound cut through the quiet like a warning bell. She looked up just in time to see the man stepping out of his car and walking toward hers. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't hesitant either. His movements were deliberate, like he had already decided what he was going to do. Her heart started pounding. She didn't wait to see what he wanted. She immediately reached over and locked the doors. The timing couldn't have been better, because almost the second the locks clicked, he reached her door and grabbed the handle. He tugged on it. Hard. She froze for a split second, then started yelling at him to go away. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, high and panicked, but she didn't care. She just wanted him to leave. He didn't. Instead, he leaned closer to the window and smiled at her. Not a friendly smile, not an awkward one. She described it later as wrong, too wide, too calm, like he was enjoying the situation. He tried to say something to her, but it came out as mumbled, slurred words that didn't quite connect. She couldn't fully understand him, which somehow made it worse. Then he spoke more clearly. He said something about how she could make lots of men do ungodly things for her. He told her she was very beautiful. The way he said it wasn't flattering. It wasn't clumsy flirting. It was possessive, evaluating, like he was talking about an object rather than a person, like he was imagining things she didn't want to imagine. She was terrified. She screamed at him again to back away, to leave her alone, but he ignored her completely. He kept tugging at the door, testing it, like he was checking to see if it might give. The windows were up, the doors were locked, and that was the only thing keeping him out. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone, but she managed to call my brother. When he answered, she didn't try to explain calmly. She told him exactly what was happening, her words tumbling over each other, panic clear in her voice. To his credit, my brother didn't hesitate. He dropped everything and ran back toward the car. When he got there and saw the man at the door, something in him snapped. He yelled at the guy to back off the car, not politely, not cautiously. He shouted with authority and anger, making it clear he was not afraid to escalate if he had to. The man finally stopped. He didn't apologize. He didn't argue. He didn't even look embarrassed. He simply let go of the door, turned around, and walked back to his car as calmly as if nothing had happened. He got inside and shut the door. That calmness was one of the most disturbing parts. People who get caught doing something wrong usually react somehow. They get defensive. They get angry. They rush away. This man did none of that. He acted like the interaction had gone exactly how he expected it to go. My brother jumped into the driver's seat, started the car, and peeled out of the lot. They didn't look back at first. They just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. Then they saw headlights behind them. The white Civic started up and followed. At first, they hoped it was just coincidence. There weren't many ways out of that area, and maybe he was just leaving too. But as they turned onto empty roads and drove through abandoned industrial stretches, the Civic stayed right behind them. Every turn they made, he made. Every acceleration, he matched. The roads were dark and nearly deserted. No traffic, no pedestrians, no businesses open. Just stretches of pavement and shadows, the kind of places where you feel very small and very alone. That's when real panic set in. My brother started driving faster, taking turns he normally wouldn't, trying to lose him. The Civic stayed with them. The headlights never fell back, never disappeared. For a while, it felt like a chase. They didn't talk much during that time. There was nothing to say. Fear filled the car, thick and suffocating. His ex later said she felt like she couldn't breathe properly, like every second stretched out too long. She kept imagining what would happen if they stopped, if they stalled, if the guy rammed them or forced them off the road. Eventually, they made it back onto the highway. Once they merged and traffic appeared, the Civic didn't follow. Either he didn't want to be seen, or he decided it wasn't worth the risk anymore. His headlights disappeared, and just like that, he was gone. They didn't stop driving for a long time. When they finally did pull over somewhere safe, the adrenaline wore off all at once. She broke down crying. My brother sat there shaking, replaying everything in his head, realizing how close something terrible might have come to happening. Later, when they talked about it more calmly, the pieces started to fit together in a way that made the whole thing even more disturbing. There is a lot of sex trafficking in and around Duluth. It's not something people like to talk about, but it's real. Ports, highways, isolated areas, and vulnerable populations make certain cities prime locations for it. The behavior of that man didn't feel random. It didn't feel like a drunken mistake or a moment of bad judgment. It felt intentional, the way he was already there, the way he watched, the way he approached only when she was alone, the comments he made, the attempt to get into the car, the pursuit afterward. All of it suggested someone testing boundaries, seeing how far he could go, seeing whether she was truly alone or protected. If my brother had taken longer, if her doors hadn't been locked, if she hadn't called for help immediately, if there had been no traffic to disappear into, any one of those things could have changed the outcome. That's what makes this story so unsettling. Not that something horrific definitely happened, but that it almost did. That the line between safety and disaster was thin enough to be measured in seconds. Even now, years later, my brother's ex still talks about that night. Not often, but when she does, her voice changes. She remembers the man's smile, the way his knuckles looked, the sound of him tugging on the door, the feeling of being watched and evaluated like prey. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a monster, it was just a man. And sometimes that's far worse. The apartment I lived in didn't start out that way. When I first moved in, it was actually nice. Not luxury or anything, but clean, quiet, and predictable. The kind of place where you recognize your neighbors in passing, where the hallways smell like laundry detergent or someone's dinner, not chemicals. It felt stable, safe enough, somewhere you could come home to and let your guard down. That changed after the building changed hands. New ownership came in, and almost immediately, everything started slipping. Maintenance requests took longer. Repairs were half done or ignored entirely. People started moving in who didn't seem to care about the place at all. Doors slammed at all hours. Strange visitors came and went. The atmosphere shifted in a way that's hard to describe unless you've lived it. The building didn't just look worse, it felt worse. Drugs started creeping in, quietly at first, then more openly. You'd see people you didn't recognize hanging around. Stairwells. Conversations would stop when you walked past. The smell of cigarettes supposed to be a normal apartment complex. People were peeking through blinds. Someone across the lot was filming on their phone. I just stood there for a second, keys in my hand, trying to process what I was seeing. That was the moment it really sank in that the place I lived had changed into something else entirely. I went inside, locked my door, and tried to forget about it. But you can't unsee something like that. It plants a seed. From then on, every noise felt more suspicious. Every unfamiliar face felt like a potential problem. I stopped feeling relaxed in my own home. Then came the smell. I was sitting in my room one evening when it hit me. At first, I couldn't place it. It wasn't like food or garbage or smoke. It was sharp, chemical, almost sweet in a sickening way. It burned my nose slightly and made the back of my throat feel tight. I opened a window, thinking maybe it was something outside, but the smell didn't go away. It got stronger. I walked into the hallway of my apartment, sniffing like an idiot, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to be drifting down from above me, my upstairs neighbors. I had barely seen them since moving in. They kept to themselves. I didn't know how many people lived up there or what they looked like. I just knew they were loud sometimes and that their footsteps echoed through my ceiling because the floors in that building were thin and creaky. I did what a lot of people do when they're worried, but don't want to panic yet. I Googled it. I searched descriptions of chemical smells in apartments. I searched things like strong chemical smell from upstairs neighbor and sweet ammonia smell apartment. I didn't expect much. I thought maybe it was cleaning supplies or some weird renovation. What came up made my stomach drop. Everything I was reading pointed toward meth production. The descriptions matched too closely. The type of smell, the way it lingered, the way it came and went, the warnings about fumes, the danger of explosions, the health risks, the fact that you might never actually see the people doing it. I sat there staring at my screen, feeling that slow, creeping fear settle in. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation, but the more I read, the harder it was to ignore the pattern. I decided to move to another room in my apartment just to get away from the smell. I figured maybe it was seeping through one area and would be less noticeable somewhere else. I grabbed my phone and walked into the next room. That's when I heard it. The floorboards above me creaked. Not randomly. Not like someone shifting their weight. It sounded deliberate, like someone walking, and then slowly the smell followed me. It wasn't instant, but it was noticeable. Within minutes, that same chemical odor started to fill the air in the new room. My heart started pounding. I stood there, frozen, listening, more creaking. It was like they were tracking my movement through the apartment. I told myself I was being paranoid. That floors creak, that smells travel. But the timing was too perfect. Every time I moved, the sound followed. Every time I tried to put distance between myself and whatever was happening upstairs, it felt like it closed in again. For the last days I lived there, that became my reality. I didn't walk normally through my own apartment anymore. I snuck. I moved slowly. I tried to stay quiet, like I didn't want to announce my presence. I avoided certain rooms. I kept windows cracked open even when it was cold. I slept poorly, always half awake, listening for sounds above me. I never saw them. That was one of the worst parts. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know how many of them there were. I didn't know if they knew I was onto them or if they even cared that I was there. They never came out when I was around. I never crossed paths with them in the hallway. They existed only as footsteps, smells, and the constant reminder that something dangerous was happening directly above my head. On top of all that was the fear of an explosion. Once you read about meth labs, you can't stop thinking about it, how unstable they are, how one mistake can turn an apartment into a fireball, how entire buildings have been destroyed because someone decided to cook drugs inside them. Every time I heard a loud noise upstairs, my body tensed. Every time I smelled something stronger than usual, I wondered if that was the moment everything went wrong. I started imagining worst-case scenarios constantly, waking up to fire, being trapped, not having time to get out. I kept my keys and wallet in the same place, so I could grab them quickly if I needed to run. I thought about escape routes more than anyone should have to think about in their own home. I didn't call the cops. People always ask that when I tell this story. Why didn't you report it? The truth is complicated. Part of it was fear. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being wrong. Fear of making things worse. I had already seen a SWAT team in that complex. I knew what kind of people were around. I didn't want to paint a target on myself if nothing came of it. Another part of it was exhaustion. Living in constant low-level fear wears you down. You stop thinking clearly. You focus on getting through the day, then the next, then the next. And eventually, you realize the only real solution is to leave. So that's what I did. I got out as soon as I could. I didn't wait for the lease to end neatly. I didn't try to make it work. I packed my things and left. The day I moved out, I felt lighter than I had in months. I didn't realize how much tension I had been carrying until it was gone. Even now, thinking back on it makes my chest tighten a little. What scares me most isn't just the drugs or the danger. It's how quiet it all was. How easy it was for something that destructive to exist just a few feet above me without anyone stepping in right away. How normal it all looked from the outside. Just another apartment, just another building people passed every day. I still think about those last nights creeping from room to room, listening to footsteps that didn't belong to me, breathing air I wasn't sure was safe. I think about how close I was to something going horribly wrong without ever seeing the people responsible. That apartment taught me something I wish I had never learned. Sometimes the scariest situations aren't loud or obvious. Sometimes they're slow, quiet, and chemical smelling, creeping through the walls while you sit there wondering if tonight is the night everything blows up. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is leave without looking back. There was a house down the street from where we lived that always stood out to me, even before anything bad happened. It wasn't old or run down. It was actually relatively new, built sometime in the mid-2000s, and it looked well cared for. In a neighborhood full of similar homes, it still managed to feel different, like there was something about it you noticed even if you couldn't explain why. The woman who lived there had multiple sclerosis. Her condition had progressed to the point where she needed constant help, so she had a live-in caregiver. People in the neighborhood knew this, but not many people really knew her personally. She kept to herself. What most people did know, though, was that she had a world-famous porcelain doll collection. That wasn't an exaggeration. Collectors and dealers from all over the world knew about it. The dolls were rare, antique, extremely valuable, and meticulously cared for. Hundreds of them, maybe more. People said entire rooms of the house were filled with porcelain faces, glass eyes, delicate hands, and old dresses. Even hearing about it as a kid made my skin crawl a little. I never went inside, but just knowing they were all in there, lined up and staring, was unsettling. Then one night, everything changed. In the middle of the night, the house caught fire. At first, no one noticed. This was a big city, and the houses were close together, but not close enough that flames immediately drew attention. People were asleep. Windows were closed. The fire alarm system in the house was supposed to automatically dial 911 if something like this happened, but for reasons no one could ever fully explain, it failed. The fire burned for around 45 minutes without anyone calling for help. By the time someone finally noticed, it wasn't a neighbor. It was a taxi driver passing through the street. He saw smoke and flames and immediately called 911. When firefighters arrived, the house was already fully engulfed. There was nothing to save. They focused on containing the fire and keeping it from spreading to nearby homes. By the time it was put out, the house was completely destroyed. What came next only made the story worse. Investigators were brought in, including arson specialists from around the world. That alone tells you how strange the fire was. They examined everything they could: the structure, the wiring, the remains, the burn patterns. They searched for accelerants, electrical faults, anything that could explain how a newer home could go up so fast and so completely. They never found a cause. To this day, no one knows how the fire started. When they searched the remains of the house, they found the homeowner's bones near the back door. Based on where she was found, investigators determined that she had been trying to escape. She had made it out of whatever room she was in and toward the exit, but because of her MS, she couldn't move fast enough. She didn't make it. The caregiver was never found. No remains, no trace, no explanation. Whether they escaped, were involved somehow, or were simply not in the house at the time, was never definitively answered. That unanswered question still hangs over the entire case, like a shadow. For me, though, the part that has always stuck in my head isn't just the mystery or the tragedy. It's the image of that doll collection. I can't help but imagine it. Room after room filled with porcelain dolls as the fire spread, the heat cracking their faces, the glass eyes shattering, the dresses burning, hundreds of frozen expressions surrounded by flames, collapsing shelves, smoke filling the air. Dolls that were meant to last generations reduced to ash in less than an hour. There's something deeply unsettling about that image, not because the dolls were alive or cursed or anything supernatural like that, but because dolls already sit in that uncomfortable space between human and object. They're meant to look like people, especially children, but they're empty, lifeless. And imagining them all burning at once, in a house where a woman was desperately trying to escape, makes the whole thing feel wrong on a level that's hard to explain. The fact that the fire had no known cause makes it worse. The fact that the alarm failed. The fact that no one noticed for so long. The fact that the caregiver vanished. All of it piles on top of itself until the story feels heavier than it should. Whenever I pass where that house used to be, I still think about it. The dolls, the fire, the woman reaching for the door, the silence of a burning house in the middle of the night while the city slept. It doesn't feel like a ghost story. It feels like one of those real-life tragedies that sticks with you because there are too many unanswered questions and too many unsettling images your mind fills in on its own. And every time I think about those porcelain faces melting in the flames, I still get the creeps. This is something that happened about 4 years ago, and it's one of those experiences that still comes up in my mind every now and then, especially when people talk about surveillance, intelligence work, or how small the world really is. At the time, it didn't feel scary in the traditional sense. There were no weapons, no threats, no violence. But the more you think about it afterward, the more unsettling it becomes. I was serving in the Navy then, and I was out drinking with 2 of my mates from the service. We were in Australia, and that detail matters, because this wasn't some obscure overseas port or a tense conflict zone. This was home, familiar ground, a place where things like this aren't supposed to happen so casually. One of the guys with us was Ukrainian. He was born in Ukraine just before the fall of the Soviet Union, which he always found amusing in a darkly ironic way. He used to joke about it, and every now and then, especially after a few drinks, he'd pull out his old Soviet birth certificate to show people. He treated it like a novelty item, something strange and historical, rather than something tied to fear or oppression. He was proud of where he came from, but he wasn't dramatic about it. He was just a normal guy who happened to have an unusual background. That night we were at a bar on the outskirts of Sydney. Not a tourist spot, not a flashy place, just a regular bar where locals went to drink, talk, and unwind. The kind of place where people don't really pay attention to anyone else unless they're being loud or obnoxious. We were relaxed, a few drinks in, talking about work, about nothing in particular, just enjoying being off duty. At some point, a man walked up to our table. He didn't look especially threatening. Middle-aged, average build, nothing about him screamed danger, but there was something deliberate about the way he approached us, like he knew exactly who he was there to see. He didn't address the group as a whole. He went straight to our Ukrainian mate and started speaking to him in his native language. At first, we laughed it off internally. It's not unheard of for people to recognize accents or take a guess at someone's background. But this wasn't clumsy or hesitant. He didn't ask where he was from. He didn't say hello in English and then switch languages. He walked up and immediately started speaking Ukrainian confidently, like they were picking up a conversation that had already started somewhere else. That alone was enough to make things feel odd. My Ukrainian mate stiffened almost immediately. You could see it in his posture, the way his shoulders tightened and his expression changed. He didn't look happy or surprised. He looked cautious. The 2 of them talked for a minute or 2 quietly, while the rest of us sat there trying not to stare. We exchanged glances. None of us recognized the guy. None of us had seen him before that night. But the way he spoke to our mate suggested familiarity, or at least knowledge that went beyond a random encounter. We decided to leave. It wasn't discussed out loud. Someone just said something like, "All right, let's get out of here," and we all stood up. The man didn't try to stop us. He didn't raise his voice. He just watched as we left, his attention still mostly on our Ukrainian mate. As we walked away, we assumed the obvious explanation. We figured they must know each other somehow. Maybe from back home, maybe from some Ukrainian community in Australia, maybe from work or mutual friends. The fact that the guy went straight to him and spoke Ukrainian made it seem logical. People don't usually do that unless they're confident the other person will understand. So we chalked it up to history we weren't part of. About 5 minutes later, our Ukrainian mate came storming over to us. He was angry, not aggressive, but genuinely upset, confused, and defensive. He called us a pack of jokers and asked what the hell we thought we were doing. We asked him what he meant, and he accused us of setting him up. He was convinced that we had arranged for that man to approach him as some kind of joke or test. That's when things took a turn. He started explaining what the man had said to him. According to him, the guy hadn't just made small talk. He had identified him by name, not a nickname, his full name. He knew his job. He knew what suburb he lived in. He knew which bars we had been at earlier that night before coming to this one. He talked about the situation back in Ukraine, referencing specific things that had been in the news recently. He spoke about politics, about conflict, about identity. At one point, he said something along the lines of, "Home will be free soon, brother. We must all stick together." That line stuck with him, and it stuck with us when he repeated it. We just stared at him. We told him very clearly that we had absolutely nothing to do with it. We hadn't set anything up. We hadn't spoken to anyone. We hadn't even noticed the guy until he walked up. We explained that from our perspective, it looked like someone who already knew him had recognized him and approached him. He didn't believe us at first. From his point of view, the coincidence was too perfect. 3 mates out drinking. One of them gets approached by a stranger who knows intimate details about his life. Then the group conveniently leaves, giving them space to talk. It probably felt staged, like some elaborate prank or test of loyalty. We insisted again. We told him there was no joke, no setup, no plan. That's when the mood shifted from confusion to something colder. One of us pointed out something that hadn't occurred to him yet. We told him that if we didn't set it up, then the only other explanation was that someone had been actively monitoring him. Not casually, not through gossip, but deliberately. Someone who knew where he lived, where he worked, who he associated with, and where he had been that very night. We asked him how else someone could know all of that. That's when he went quiet. You could see the realization sink in slowly. He replayed the conversation in his head, this time without the assumption that it was a prank. The details became more disturbing the more he thought about them. This wasn't someone guessing or bluffing. The information was too accurate, too specific. We told him firmly that he should file a security report. Being in the Navy, that wasn't an overreaction. It was standard procedure when something didn't add up, especially when it involved foreign nationals, sensitive information, or unexplained personal surveillance. Even if it turned out to be nothing, it was better to document it. He resisted at first. No one likes the idea of being watched. No one likes the implication that they're important enough to be noticed by the wrong people. He kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe the guy was from the same town back home. Maybe he had mutual friends. Maybe he had seen him on social media and pieced things together. But none of those explanations really held up. Social media doesn't tell you which bar someone was at an hour ago. Mutual friends don't usually know your full work details and current movements unless they're very close. And even then, the timing was too precise. We pressed the issue. We told him that even if he thought it was nothing, the Navy would want to know. That intelligence work doesn't always look like spies and trench coats. Sometimes it looks like a casual conversation in a bar. I don't know if he ever filed that report. He said he would. He said he'd think about it. After that night, we didn't talk about it much. People tend to avoid subjects that make them uncomfortable, especially when there's no clear resolution. Life moved on, deployments happened, people got reassigned. We didn't all stay in the same place, but the memory stuck with me. What unsettles me most isn't the idea that someone was watching him. That's disturbing, sure, but it's also abstract. What really gets under my skin is how normal it all looked from the outside. A bar, a conversation, a stranger saying hello in a familiar language. If you didn't know the context, you wouldn't have thought twice about it. It made me realize how easily information can be gathered, how casually it can be deployed, and how little it takes to remind someone that they're not as anonymous as they think they are, especially if they come from a place with political significance, conflict, or historical baggage. My Ukrainian mate wasn't a high-ranking official. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful. He was just a guy serving in the Navy, living his life in another country. And yet, someone knew enough about him to walk up and make him feel exposed in the span of a few sentences. That's the part that lingers. Not fear, exactly. Just awareness. A reminder that sometimes you don't know who's paying attention or why. And that sometimes the most unsettling encounters aren't loud or dramatic. They're quiet, polite, and wrapped in words that sound almost friendly. Whenever I think back on that night, I remember the look on his face when he realized we weren't joking. That moment when confusion turned into understanding, when the idea of being singled out stopped being theoretical and became personal. Nothing else ever came of it, as far as I know. No follow-up, no explanation, no second encounter, just a stranger in a bar, a language spoken without hesitation, and a reminder that some conversations are never as random as they seem. Before we move on, I have to ask you something. Have you ever lived somewhere that made you genuinely scared to be in your own home? Not just annoyed by noise or bad parking, but actually unsafe. Like you're wondering if tonight's the night something goes wrong? Because honestly, after hearing that meth lab story, I'm starting to think this is way more common than people admit. If you've got a neighbor story that made you move out or consider it, drop it in the comments. I want to know how many of us have been through something like this. This happened when I was much younger, back when I was still a kid, and the world felt bigger, darker, and harder to understand. It's one of those memories that never really faded, no matter how much time passed. I've gone back and forth on it in my head for years, trying to explain it, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the feeling of it has never fully gone away. My family and I were staying at our summer house out east. It wasn't a fancy place, just a simple house we used during warmer months. It always felt different from our regular home. The air smelled different. The nights were quieter. Sounds carried farther. Even as a kid, I remember feeling like the place had its own personality, especially at night. That evening was completely normal. Nothing strange had happened during the day. We had eaten, talked, and relaxed like we always did. When night came, my mom, my sister, and I were sitting together watching a movie in one room. My brother had already gone to sleep in another room. Everything felt safe and ordinary. As the movie went on, I started getting tired. My eyes felt heavy, and my body felt sluggish in that way it does when you're just about to fall asleep. I told my mom and sister goodnight and walked down the hallway to the room where my brother was sleeping. There was a cot set up next to his bed, and that's where I planned to sleep. The room was long, longer than it needed to be. and that always bothered me a little. At one end was where my brother and I slept, and the other end disappeared into darkness. The lights were off, and only a little bit of glow from the hallway made it inside. The air was hot and sticky, the kind of heat that makes it hard to get comfortable. My skin felt damp, and the sheets clung to me. I lay down on the cot and tried to fall asleep. I tossed and turned, shifting from one side to the other, trying to find a position that felt right. Every little sound seemed louder than usual. The creak of the cot, the faint hum of the house settling, my brother's slow breathing nearby. I remember staring into the darkness, feeling that familiar childhood fear of the dark creeping in. Not panic, just that uneasy feeling that makes you pull the covers a little higher. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap. The sound was sharp and clear, like two wooden sticks hitting something solid. It came from the opposite end of the room, far away from where I was lying. At first, I froze. My body went completely still. I told myself it was nothing. Houses make noises, wood expands and contracts. That's what adults always say. In my head, I thought, what was that? I waited, holding my breath without even realizing it. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap. The sound was unmistakable. It wasn't random. It wasn't a creak or a pop. It was deliberate, rhythmic, and it was closer than before. A chill ran through me. I pulled the covers up a little higher, my heart starting to beat faster. I told myself not to. Be stupid. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired, that my brain was playing tricks on me because I was scared of the dark. Then it happened again. Tap, tap, closer. This time I felt it in my chest. The fear wasn't abstract anymore. It was real and physical. My stomach tightened and my throat felt dry. I realized that each set of taps was moving toward me, slowly but steadily, every 5 to 10 seconds. Whatever was making the sound was traveling across the room. I turned my head slightly toward my brother and nudged him gently, hoping he would wake up. He didn't move. He was fast asleep, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away. Tap, tap. Closer still. I pulled the covers over my head, hiding beneath them like that could somehow protect me. My breathing became shallow and I tried desperately to keep it quiet. I didn't want whatever it was to know I was awake. I didn't want it to know I was there. Another tap, another tap. The sound was now close enough that I could tell exactly where it was coming from. I could almost picture it, even though I couldn't see anything. My mind started filling in the gaps, imagining shapes and movements I didn't want to imagine. I started nudging my brother harder. Tap, tap. I shook him gently at first, then more urgently. He didn't respond. Panic set in. I didn't want to call out. I didn't want to scream. I felt trapped between the need to stay silent and the need for someone, anyone, to wake up. Tap, tap. It was close. Too close. I was shaking now, my whole body trembling under the covers. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my chest. My thoughts were racing, jumping from one terrifying idea to another. What was it? Why was it moving toward me? What would happen when it reached me? Tap, tap. I could tell it was only a few feet away now. I started violently shaking my brother, still trying to stay quiet, tears burning in my eyes. He mumbled something, but didn't wake up. The frustration and fear mixed together until I felt like I was going to burst. Tap, tap, it was right there. I could hear it so clearly that it felt like the sound was inside my head as much as outside it. Every tap echoed in my body. I could feel where the sound came from, like it had weight to it. Tap, tap. I realized then that whatever was making the sound was on the nightstand next to my head, only about a foot away. I felt nauseous. My stomach twisted and I thought I was going to throw up. Time seemed to slow down. Every second stretched into something unbearable. My thoughts spiraled into pure fear. What if I waited? What if the taps moved onto me? What if something touched me? What if I died right there in the dark, under the covers, and no one even knew what was happening? My head was spinning. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed, completely helpless. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It might have been seconds. It might have been minutes. It felt like hours. Tap, tap. I couldn't take it anymore. In one sudden burst, I threw the covers off, screamed, and ran. I sprinted out of the room as fast as I could, my feet slapping against the floor, my breath coming out in panicked gasps. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I ran straight toward the light, toward my mom, toward safety. The moment I reached her, the fear came pouring out of me all at once. My body was shaking, my chest hurt, and I could barely catch my breath. The light felt blinding after the darkness. The normal sounds of the house felt unreal, like I had stepped into a different world. I never told them what happened. Not really. I didn't think they would care. Or maybe I thought they wouldn't believe me. Kids hear things. Kids imagine things. That's what adults say. I didn't have the words to explain how real it felt, how clear the sound was, how deliberate and close it became. So I kept it to myself. Years later, I still think about it. I've tried to explain it logically. I've read about auditory hallucinations, about how fear and exhaustion can make the brain create incredibly realistic sounds. I've read about sleep-related phenomena, about how the mind can be awake while the body is still half dreaming. I've tried to convince myself that's what it was, but the problem is I know I wasn't asleep. I remember everything too clearly. I remember the heat, the smell of the room, the exact rhythm of the taps, the way each one moved closer, the way I could tell where the sound was coming from. It didn't feel like something inside my head. It felt external, solid, real. That's what makes it so hard to let go of. Even now, I can still hear it if I think about it too long. Tap, tap, the sound of something approaching, slowly, patiently, without urgency. That's what scared me the most. There was no rush to it. Whatever it wasn't frantic. It was calm. Sometimes I wonder if my mind really did trick me. If fear fed into itself until my brain created a pattern that wasn't actually there. That explanation makes sense on paper. It's comforting. It gives me something to hold on to. But there's a part of me that still isn't convinced. Because fear doesn't usually come with such precision. Fear is messy. It's chaotic. What I experienced felt structured, measured, intentional. I don't claim it was something supernatural. I don't say it was a ghost or a presence or anything like that. I honestly don't know what it was. I just know how it felt and how deeply it stayed with me. That night changed the way I experienced darkness. Even years later, I'm more aware of sounds at night. I notice patterns. I listen more closely than I probably should. Sometimes when a house creaks or something taps against a surface, my body reacts before my mind does. I've learned that childhood fear has a way of embedding itself deep inside you. Even when you grow up, even when you understand logic and reason, those early experiences don't just disappear. They become part of how you perceive the world. I don't expect anyone to give me a perfect answer. I don't know if there is one. Maybe it really was my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe my fear of the dark combined with exhaustion and heat created something vivid and unforgettable. Or maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that it felt real. It sounded real. And in that moment, under the covers, listening to those taps come closer and closer, the fear was as real as anything I've ever felt. And even now, after all these years, that memory still taps quietly at the back of my mind. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. My father is a dentist, and over the years he's heard a lot of stories from his patients. Most of them are ordinary, some are sad. A few stay with you forever. This is one of those. He told it to me when I was younger, not to scare me, but because it was something that had clearly never left him. Even now, when I think about it, it still feels heavy in a quiet, helpless way. We live in Croatia, and here there's a tradition that happens every year. When high school seniors finish their final year, there's a massive celebration. The whole city feels it. Students are out in the streets all day, drinking, singing, yelling, throwing flour and paint, just letting everything out after years of school. For most people, it's a happy memory, loud, messy, but harmless. Or at least that's how it's supposed to be. About 20 years ago, on one of those days, the son of one of my father's patients was walking home from school. He was still young, just a kid really, caught up in a normal day. He wasn't partying, he wasn't drunk, he was just going home. His route took him through the main square of Zagreb, a place everyone knows, a place that's usually full of life, tourists, music, and history. In that square, there's a well. It's one of those things you grow up seeing and never really think about. It's just there, part of the scenery. People walk past it every day without giving it a second thought. That day, though, it became the center of something terrible. 4 guys were there. They were drunk, heavily drunk, caught up in the chaos of the celebrations. Whether they were seniors themselves or just people taking advantage of the day, no one ever really knew. What mattered was that they saw this kid walking by and decided, for reasons that will never make sense, to mess with him. They grabbed him. Before he could really react, before he could understand what was happening, they picked him up and threw him into the well. It wasn't a prank in the harmless sense. It wasn't funny. It was reckless, violent, and cruel. As he fell, he hit the edge of the well with the back of his head. Hard. The 4 guys ran off. They disappeared into the crowd, into the noise, into the celebration. No one stopped them. No one caught them. To them, it was probably just a moment, a stupid, drunken action they didn't think twice about, something they might not even remember clearly the next day. The kid somehow managed to get out of the well. That part always breaks my heart the most. He was injured, but he was still conscious, still able to walk, still able to think, at least enough to get himself home. He made it back to his family and told them what had happened. He told them that some drunk guys had thrown him into the well and that he had hit his head. At the time, it didn't seem like an emergency. Head injuries can be deceptive. People don't always collapse right away. Sometimes they talk, walk, laugh, and seem fine. His family probably thought he was shaken, maybe bruised, maybe had a concussion. They told him to rest. He went to bed. During the night, his brain began to swell. By morning, he wasn't responding. He wouldn't wake up. Panic set in immediately. An ambulance was called. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors did everything they could, but it was already too late. The swelling had caused irreversible damage. He was pronounced brain dead. A kid who had been walking home from school the day before was gone. Not because of an accident he caused, not because of illness, not because of war or disaster, just because 4 drunk people thought it would be funny to throw someone into a well. When my father told me this story, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He told it slowly, almost carefully, like each detail carried weight. He talked about the parents, about the way grief changes people, about how they sat in his dental chair years later, still carrying that loss with them in their faces, in the way they spoke, in the silence between sentences. The part that disturbed him the most is the same part that disturbs me. Those 4 guys were never found. They never knew what they had done. Somewhere out there, they went on with their lives. They sobered up. They finished school. They got jobs. Maybe they got married. Maybe they had children of their own. They might remember that day as just another wild celebration, another blurry memory from their youth. They will probably never know that a boy died because of them. They will never know that a family lost their son, that parents woke up every day afterward to a house that felt wrong and empty, that birthdays became painful, that holidays were never the same, that their stupid, careless moment rippled outward and destroyed lives. That's what makes this story so hard to sit with. It wasn't planned. It wasn't targeted. It wasn't personal. It was random, pure chance. Wrong place, wrong time. A kid walking through a square he had walked through countless times before. It's terrifying in a quiet way, because it reminds you how fragile everything really is, how close life and death can be, how one moment, one decision made by strangers can end everything without warning. Whenever I think about that story, I think about how often we assume we're safe just because we're doing something normal, walking home, passing through a public place, living our routine lives. We don't expect danger in those moments, and most of the time, we're right. But sometimes, unpredictably, the world turns cruel for no reason at all. My father said that case changed the way he looked at people. It made him more aware of how much pain strangers can carry quietly. It made him more protective, more cautious, especially when it came to young people and alcohol and crowds. For me, it changed the way I think about responsibility, not just legal responsibility, but moral responsibility. The idea that what you do when you're drunk still matters, that just messing around can have consequences far beyond what you imagine, that you don't get to decide whether something was harmless after the fact. That kid didn't get a second chance. He didn't get to grow up, to finish school, to fall in love, to build a life. His story ended in a place that was supposed to be safe, on a day that was supposed to be a celebration, and the people who caused it will likely never know. That's the part that still makes my stomach sink, not just the loss itself, but the silence around it, the absence of accountability, the idea that sometimes the worst damage is done without anyone ever realizing they were responsible. He was just at the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's all it took. This is one of those things I've carried quietly for a long time. It isn't something I've ever really talked about, not because I wanted to protect anyone, but because once you say something like this out loud, it becomes real in a way you can't undo. Even now, telling it feels strange, like opening a door I've kept shut for years. It's not a ghost story or a campfire legend, even though it starts like one. It's just something that happened, and the weight of it never really left me. I was about 20 at the time. I lived in a small area where people made up stories out of boredom as much as fear. There was a local urban legend everyone knew about, something people joked about more than believed. They called it the Angry Hobbit, a ridiculous name, really. Supposedly, this angry little creature lived near a swimming hole in the woods. People said it would watch you, throw rocks, or scare you off if you stayed too long. Nobody took it seriously. It was just one of those things people laughed about when they were drunk or trying to scare someone new. The swimming hole itself was a real place. It was out in the woods, secluded, quiet, the kind of place you went when you didn't want to be seen. What most people didn't really think about was that it wasn't a natural swimming hole at all. It was an old strip mine that had filled with water over the years. The water was dark and incredibly deep, with sheer drops and sharp rock edges hidden below the surface. Well, it looked peaceful, but it wasn't safe. One night, a few friends and I decided to head out there with some beers to cool off. It was one of those nights where no one was thinking very far ahead. We were young, restless, and convinced nothing bad could really happen to us. The legend came up in passing, mostly as a joke. Someone laughed about the Angry Hobbit, Someone else rolled their eyes. That was it. There was one friend with us who was a bit younger than the rest. Not by much, but enough that he still had that careless confidence people have before life teaches them otherwise. At some point, he wandered off to take a piss. As he stood up to go, I jokingly told him about the legend again, trying to freak him out a little. I didn't mean anything by it. I honestly didn't believe it myself. He shrugged it off and disappeared into the trees. 5 minutes passed, then he came back. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. He stumbled out of the darkness toward us, and there was blood on his shirt. A lot of blood. It wasn't a scrape or a cut on his arm. It was coming from his torso. His face was pale, his eyes wide in a way I'd never seen before. He tried to talk, but the words didn't come out right. He was gasping, struggling to breathe. Panic hit all of us at once. He had been stabbed, not slashed, not cut by a branch or a rock. Stabbed. Later, we would understand that his lung had been punctured. At that moment, all we knew was that something had gone very wrong, very fast. Between gasps, he managed to say that someone had come out of the woods and attacked him. Not a monster, not some imaginary creature, a person, a homeless man. He described him as very small, someone who had clearly been living out there for a long time. The angry hobbit wasn't a creature at all. It was a homeless little person who had been living in the woods for years, mostly unseen, mostly ignored, until someone wandered too close. Everything after that is a blur, but certain moments are burned into my memory. One friend took off running to get help. Another stayed with the injured guy, trying to keep him conscious, trying to stop the bleeding as best we could with what we had. I remember the smell of blood mixed with damp earth. I remember how quiet the woods suddenly felt, like everything was holding its breath. Then something happened that I still don't fully understand. Another friend went back into the woods supposedly to check on things, to make sure the attacker was gone, or maybe to look for help from another direction. He came back a short time later and told us calmly not to worry about the injured guy anymore. He said it like it was nothing. He said the swimming hole was incredibly deep. He reminded us that it was an old strip mine. He said it in a way that made my stomach turn, even then. At the time, I was too shocked, too overwhelmed to fully process what he was implying. I just remember feeling cold, like something inside me had dropped away. The injured friend was gone after that. I don't remember seeing him taken away. I don't remember an ambulance. I don't remember police lights. I remember confusion, fear, and people suddenly acting like they wanted to forget the entire night had ever happened. A few days later, I went back. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for proof that I hadn't imagined it. Maybe I needed to see the place in daylight to make sense of it. Maybe part of me hoped I'd find nothing and could convince myself it was all wrong. The woods looked different during the day, less threatening, more ordinary. Birds were out. Sunlight filtered through the trees. It almost felt peaceful, which made what I found even worse. Near where we had been sitting, there was a rock covered in dried blood. Not a little blood, enough that there was no mistaking what it was. From that rock, there was a drag mark in the dirt and leaves. It led away from the area deeper into the woods, toward a cliff that dropped straight down into the water. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. No body, no sign of a struggle beyond that. Just the silent evidence of something terrible having happened. That was the moment everything clicked into place. The homeless man had stabbed him, yes. But I don't believe he was the one who finished it. I'm fairly sure one of my own friends did. I'm fairly sure he decided it was easier to make the problem disappear than to deal with the consequences. The swimming hole was deep enough that if a body went in, it could surface far away or not at all. The area was secluded enough that no one would notice. No one was around. No one was watching. After that day, I never talked about it. I never went back to that swimming hole. I never spoke to anyone who had been there that night again. Not out of loyalty, not out of fear even. It was more like a switch flipped inside me. I didn't want to know these people anymore. I didn't want to share space with them. I didn't want to hear their voices and remember what I'd seen. I also didn't go to the police. That's something I've thought about a lot. I've asked myself whether that makes me complicit, whether my silence makes me just as guilty. I don't have a clean answer. I was young. I was scared. I didn't know what I could prove. I didn't know who would believe me. All I knew was that speaking up would drag me into something I didn't know how to survive. So I stayed quiet. Years passed. Life moved on in the way it always does, indifferent to what we carry inside us. I built a life. I met new people. I laughed. I worked. But that night never really left me. It sits in the back of my mind, waiting. Sometimes it comes back in dreams. Sometimes it comes back when I hear about unsolved cases, about bodies found in water, about people who vanish without explanation. The worst part isn't the violence itself. It's the realization that the legend wasn't the danger. The danger was people. The danger was how quickly someone could decide another person was disposable. How easily a bad situation could turn into something irreversible because someone chose the simplest, cruelest option. I think about the kid who was stabbed, about how he laughed it off, about how he walked into the woods thinking nothing would happen, about how his life ended not because of a monster in the trees, but because of human choices layered on top of each other. I also think about the homeless man, about how he lived out there unseen for years, becoming a joke, a legend, something people mocked instead of understood. I don't excuse what he did. Stabbing someone is unforgivable. But I can't ignore the fact that he existed in a space where no one cared enough to notice him until something horrible happened. And then there's my friend, the one I believe did the worst thing. I don't know how he lives with it. I don't know if he thinks about it at all. I don't know if he tells himself a story that makes it easier to sleep at night. I don't know if he even remembers it clearly, or if he's buried it under years of denial. I know I remember. That place taught me something I didn't want to learn at 20. That sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't a legend or a story people tell to scare each other. It's the moment you realize you're surrounded by people capable of doing something unforgivable and then pretending it never happened. I never talked about it until now. I don't know if saying it changes anything. I don't know if it helps, but it feels wrong to carry it forever without ever letting it exist outside my own head. Some places aren't haunted by monsters. They're haunted by what people did there and by the silence that followed. This isn't really a scary story. It's more of a heavy one, the kind that sits quietly in your chest and comes back when you least expect it. It's about regret and that awful feeling that if just one small thing had gone differently, someone might still be alive. I've carried it for years, and even now I don't know if telling it makes it lighter or just reminds me why it still hurts. This happened about 12 years ago. I was young, still figuring out who I was, still living in that phase of life where everything feels important and temporary at the same time. I had just started dating a girl. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was also very close to one of my best friends at the time, who was also a girl. The three of us spent a lot of time together, and back then, it felt like nothing could really go wrong. We were young, we were broke, and we were used to just walking everywhere, or relying on other people for rides. One night, we were meeting up with two other friends. One of them was an old friend who had moved to the United States. He was back visiting, and it felt special to see him again. The other was a girl we'd known since high school. She was dramatic, always had something going on, always in the middle of some conflict. Even back then, we all knew she had issues she hadn't worked through, but she was still part of the group, so we accepted it as normal. We ended up going to her boyfriend's house. I didn't really know the guy well. He wasn't someone I disliked, just someone I hadn't spent much time around. My girlfriend and I walked to his place, and once everyone was there, we just hung out. Nothing wild. We played a little poker, talked, killed time the way young people do when they don't really have anywhere else to be. Since none of us had cars or driver's licenses yet, the plan was for the boyfriend to drive us all home. It was late, but not unusually late. The night felt ordinary. That's part of what makes it so hard to think about now. There were no warning signs that this night would become something I'd replay in my head for years. I lived on the other side of town from the rest of the group, so the plan was to drop me off first. Before we left, though, the boyfriend and my dramatic old friend got into an argument. It was pointless. The kind of argument that doesn't even have a clear beginning or end. Just raised voices, hurt egos, and the same old patterns repeating themselves. It wasn't new. They had fought before. Everyone had seen it before. Still, something about it bothered me that night. I tried to get them to stop. I remember feeling annoyed more than anything else at first. I just wanted to go home. I didn't want to sit there listening to them go at each other over nothing. I told them it wasn't worth it. I told them to drop it. I pushed harder than I usually would, and after some back and forth, they finally stopped. We got into the car. Looking back, that moment feels heavier than it should. At the time, it felt like such a small thing, just getting two people to stop arguing so we could leave. I didn't think of it as something meaningful. I didn't think it mattered in any lasting way. He dropped me off at my place first, just like planned. He got out of the car, said my goodbyes, and went inside. Everything still felt normal. I didn't have a cell phone back then, so once I was home, I was cut off from whatever was happening out there, unless someone called the house. Not long after I got home, the phone rang. It was my friend from the US. I could hear it immediately, even before he said anything clearly. Police sirens, ambulance sounds, chaos in the background, the kind of noise that doesn't belong in a casual phone call. My stomach dropped before I even knew why. I asked him what happened. His voice was shaking. He told me they had been driving, turning the car after a red light. A guy around our age had run across the street trying to catch a bus. They hit him. He was dead on the spot. I remember sitting there, holding the phone, not fully understanding what I was hearing. It didn't feel real. It felt like he was describing something from a movie or a news story, not something that had just happened to people I knew on streets I had walked. My friend was a mess. He was shaking when he talked. He stayed shaken for days afterward. That night changed him. He never came back to visit again after that. Not once. I don't blame him. I think that night burned itself into him in a way he didn't know how to escape. After the call ended, everything hit me at once. The anger came first. Anger at the situation. Anger at how pointless it all was. Anger at how fast everything had gone wrong. And then the guilt followed, heavy and suffocating. I kept thinking about the argument. If I had convinced them to stop fighting earlier, if we had left even a minute sooner, if I had decided to walk home instead of getting a ride, if any small detail had changed, would that guy still be alive? I know logically that I didn't cause the accident. I know I wasn't driving the car. I know I didn't push anyone into the street. I know that life doesn't work on clean cause and effect lines the way our guilt wants it to. But logic doesn't stop the thoughts from coming. The worst part came later when I found out who the guy was. He wasn't a stranger. He was someone I knew. Someone I had played basketball with a lot. Someone who was really close friends with another group of people I used to hang out with. Not a best friend, not someone I talked to every day, but someone familiar, someone real, someone with a face, a laugh, a presence. That made it all so much worse. It stopped being an abstract tragedy and became personal. I could picture him running for the bus. I could picture the kind of thing he'd joke about. I could picture him on the court. And then I had to picture him dying alone on the street because of a moment that felt so random and yet so cruelly precise. For a long time after that, I replayed the night over and over in my head. I obsessed over the timing, the argument, the drive, the drop-off. I wondered if I should have stayed in the car longer, if I should have said something different, if I should have insisted on walking home instead. That's the trap guilt sets for you. It convinces you that you had more control than you really did. Over time, I've come to understand that life is fragile in ways we don't like to think about. People like to believe that bad things only happen when someone makes a big, obvious mistake. But that's not how it works. Sometimes everything lines up just wrong. Sometimes a life ends because of timing, coincidence, and momentum that no one can fully control. Knowing that doesn't make the feeling go away. It just makes it quieter. Even now, years later, that night still bothers me. Not every day, not constantly, but it comes back when I least expect it. When I hear sirens at night, when I see someone running across the street, when I think about how many tiny decisions we make every day without realizing how much they matter. I don't blame myself the way I used to, but I still feel that ache, that sense of what if, that sadness that comes from knowing someone is gone and that their absence rippled through so many lives, including mine. If there's anything I took from that experience, it's this. Life really can be taken away in an instant, not always because of malice or recklessness, but sometimes just because the world doesn't pause long enough for us to catch up. And sometimes all you're left with is the wish that you could go back and change something small. Say one more thing, take one more step, slow time down just enough. You can't. All you can do is carry the lesson forward, cherish life, hold the people you love close, say the things you mean to say. Don't assume there will always be another night, another ride, another chance to make things right, because sometimes there isn't. This is something that happened recently to a friend of mine, and it still doesn't feel real when I think about it. It's not a scary story. There's nothing mysterious or dramatic about it. It's just one of those moments in life that hits you hard and leaves you sitting with a feeling you don't quite know what to do with. A mix of sadness, shock, regret, and that quiet realization that nothing is guaranteed, no matter how young you are. He was a close friend, someone I talked to regularly. We were all in uni together, still in that phase of life where the future feels wide open and mostly safe. Plans were always being made. There was always something coming up, a party, a night out, a trip, something to look forward to. Death didn't feel like something that belonged in our world yet. About a week before everything happened, he went on vacation to Korea. He was excited about it, posting pictures, sending messages, telling us about the food, the places he was seeing, the experience of being somewhere completely different. While he was there, he kept talking about how much he was looking forward to coming back home. He kept saying that when he got back, we'd all go out drinking, catch up properly, celebrate him being back. It felt normal, casual, like the kind of thing you say all the time without thinking twice. Nothing about his messages sounded off. He was happy, energized, making plans, looking ahead. When he finally came back, he didn't even slow down. Almost immediately, he went out to a party. That night, sometime in the middle of it, he called me and a few other friends. It was late, really late, the kind of time where most people either have their phones on silent or are already asleep. I remember seeing the missed call later and thinking nothing of it at first. I assumed he was drunk, calling to say something stupid, or inviting us out last minute the way people do when they're already having a good time. Most of us didn't answer. That's the part that sticks with me the most. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up to messages that didn't make sense at first. People asking if I'd heard. People saying his name followed by words that didn't feel like they belonged together. Accident. Passed away. Gone. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Some kind of misunderstanding. A rumor that would be corrected in a few minutes. That happens sometimes. Someone gets hurt, someone exaggerates, panic spreads, and then it turns out they're fine. I kept waiting for that moment where someone would say, "Never mind, he's okay." It never came. Instead, the details slowly started to trickle in. He had died that night. There had been an accident. Beyond that, the stories weren't clear. Different versions floated around. Different explanations. I didn't want to dig into it. I didn't want to ask his parents or his family what really happened. It didn't feel right. Whatever the truth was, it wouldn't bring him back, and it wasn't my place to satisfy curiosity at the cost of their pain. What mattered was that he was gone. The fact that he had called us just hours before made it harder to accept. That phone call replayed in my head over and over. I kept thinking about what he might have wanted to say. Was he just checking in? Was he inviting us out? Was he just in a good mood and wanted to hear familiar voices? Or was there something else? Something he wanted to talk about? I'll never know. That uncertainty is its own kind of grief. Knowing that someone reached out and you didn't pick up and now you never will. It's not that I blame myself. I know I couldn't have known. I know people miss calls all the time. But knowing that doesn't stop the feeling from settling in anyway. I keep thinking about how excited he was to come back. How sure he was that there was more time, more nights out, more conversations, more everything. There wasn't in the days after. His death, everything felt strange. Time moved differently. Conversations felt hollow. People spoke more quietly, more carefully. It was like the world had tilted slightly, just enough to make everything feel off. Classes continued, life continued, but it all felt wrong, like we were pretending nothing had happened, when something massive had just been ripped out of our lives. I remember thinking about how young we all were, how this wasn't supposed to happen yet. Death is something you expect to deal with later, after people have lived full lives, after illnesses, after long goodbyes. Not like this. Not suddenly. Not to someone who was making plans days earlier. A few weeks later, his family organized a celebration for his birthday. That alone felt surreal, celebrating the birthday of someone who wasn't there anymore. But it wasn't a sad, quiet gathering the way I expected. It was full of people, friends, family, laughter mixed with tears, stories being told, memories shared. It wasn't about pretending he hadn't died. It was about honoring the fact that he had lived. Then came something none of us saw coming. His family revealed that his girlfriend was pregnant. They did it as part of the gathering with a gender reveal. The room went silent for a moment, and then everything exploded into emotion. Shock, joy, grief, hope, all tangled together in a way that's hard to put into words. It felt unreal. Here we were, mourning someone who was gone and at the same time being told that a part of him was still coming into the world. A child who would never meet their father but would carry his blood, his name, his story forward. I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, it was beautiful, a reminder that life doesn't stop, even when it feels like it should. On the other hand, it made the loss feel even heavier. He should have been there. He should have been the one announcing it. He should have been planning a future, not being remembered at a birthday. Celebration held in his absence. That contrast messed with my head more than anything else. It still does. I think about that child sometimes, about how they'll grow up hearing stories about a father they never got to know. about how every birthday, every milestone will come with a quiet reminder of what's missing, about how love and loss can exist side by side in such a brutal way. Losing him forced me to confront something I'd never really thought about before: how fragile everything is, how quickly plans turn into memories, how easily later becomes never. I keep thinking about the version of myself from before that night, the one who assumed there would always be more time, more chances to answer calls, more opportunities to say the things that matter. That version of me feels naive now, not stupid, just unaware. I wish I had known that the last time I saw him was the last time. I wish I had known that the messages he sent from Korea were some of the last ones I'd ever get. I wish I had known that the missed call in the middle of the night would turn into something I'd think about for years. But that's the thing, you never know. If we did, life would be unbearable. Every goodbye would feel final. Every unanswered call would feel like a potential tragedy. We can only live assuming there will be more time, because the alternative is impossible. Still, that doesn't stop the regret from sneaking in. Not regret in the sense of guilt, but regret in the sense of longing. Wanting one more conversation, one more night out, one more chance to say, "I'll see you soon," and have it be true. What hurts the most is how normal everything was, right up until it wasn't. There was no warning, no slow decline, no chance to prepare. One moment he was alive, excited, making plans. The next, he was gone. That kind of loss leaves you feeling unsteady. It makes you look at everyone around you differently. Friends, family, strangers. You start noticing how temporary everything really is. I don't think about death constantly now, but I think about life differently. I answer calls more often. I say yes to plans more than I used to. I try not to leave things unsaid when I can help it. Not because I'm afraid, but because I've seen how quickly opportunities disappear. Sometimes I still imagine what that night would have been like if I had answered. Maybe it would have been nothing. Maybe he would have just laughed, told me where he was, and hung up. Or maybe it would have been a conversation I'd remember forever. I'll never know, and that's something I've had to accept. Grief doesn't always come as overwhelming sadness. Sometimes it comes as quiet thoughts late at night. Sometimes it comes as a strange feeling when your phone rings. Sometimes it comes as a smile followed by a sudden ache when you remember something funny they used to do. Losing a friend this early in life changes you. It forces you to grow up in a way you didn't ask for. It teaches you that nothing is promised, not tomorrow, not next week, not even the rest of the night. I still think about him when we go out drinking. I still think about him when someone mentions Korea. I still think about him when I see missed calls on my phone. He's part of my life now in a different way, woven into memories instead of moments. It feels weird. It feels unfair. It feels unfinished. But it's real. If there's one thing this has taught me, it's this. Don't assume you'll always have another chance. Don't put off saying you care. Don't ignore the small moments because you think they'll always be there. You never know when someone's time is going to come. And sometimes the hardest part isn't the loss itself, but realizing how much you took for granted before it happened. This is one of those stories that doesn't rely on fear or mystery to be horrifying. It's horrifying because it actually happened, because every step of it involved failures by adults who were supposed to protect a child, and because the victim came so close to surviving. The closer you look at it, the worse it gets. One of the last victims of Jeffrey Dahmer was a 14-year-old boy. He was just a kid. Not someone living on the margins of society in the way people like to imagine when they distance themselves from tragedy, but a child who trusted the wrong adult at the wrong moment. Dahmer lured him back to his apartment. This wasn't unusual behavior for Dahmer. He relied on charm, lies, and the assumption that no one would look too closely at a quiet man who seemed awkward but harmless. Once the boy was inside, Dahmer drugged him. The drugs left him confused, disoriented, and unable to properly defend himself or understand what was happening. What Dahmer did next is almost impossible to comprehend. He attempted a lobotomy using a household drill. Not in a medical setting, not with any knowledge or care, just a drill driven into the boy's skull. The goal wasn't mercy or treatment, it was control. Dahmer wanted a living person who could not resist him, who could not leave, who could not say no. The boy survived the initial attack, but the damage was devastating. He could no longer speak properly, he was barely able to stand. Whatever sense of reality he had left was fractured, and yet somehow, through pain, confusion, and trauma, he did something extraordinary. He escaped. While Dahmer left the apartment, the boy stumbled out into the street wearing only his underwear. He was bleeding, he was disoriented, he was clearly injured. He was a child in obvious distress, wandering in public, unable to explain what had been done to him. 3 women saw him. They immediately recognized that something was wrong and called the police. They tried to help him. They stayed with him. They didn't ignore him. They didn't walk away. They did what people are supposed to do when they see someone vulnerable and in danger. When the police arrived, the situation should have been clear. A naked, bleeding, nonverbal teenage boy in the middle of the street is not a misunderstanding. It is not a minor issue. It is not something you brush off. It is an emergency. But the officers assumed he was drunk. They treated him like a problem to be handled quickly, not a victim to be protected. They didn't try to communicate with him in a meaningful way. They didn't consider that he might be injured or terrified or incapable of speaking because of trauma. Then Dahmer returned. He saw the police outside his apartment building, talking to the women and the boy. And he stepped in calmly, confidently, and lied. He told the officers that the boy was his house guest. He said he was embarrassed. He said the boy sometimes behaved this way after drinking too much. And the police believed him. They didn't question why a 14-year-old would be drinking with a grown man. They didn't question why the boy couldn't speak. They didn't question the blood. They didn't question the fear in his body language. They didn't listen to the women who were trying to explain that something was very wrong. Dahmer invited the officers into his apartment. They went inside. He showed them the boy's clothes. He showed them Polaroid photos he had taken earlier, presenting them as proof that the boy belonged there. The officers accepted this without digging deeper. They didn't perform a search. They didn't open closed doors. They didn't look around carefully. Behind one of those closed doors on the bedroom floor was the body of another victim from an earlier murder. The officers never found it. They left. And they left the boy behind. Imagine what that moment must have been like. A 14-year-old child, severely injured, unable to speak, having just escaped unimaginable violence, finally sees help arrive. Police officers, authority figures, people he has probably been taught his entire life are there to protect him. He is brought back to the place where he was tortured, back to the man who did it to him. And then the door closes. There is no rescue. There is no second chance. There is no one left to help. Dahmer killed him shortly afterward. That's what makes this story so unbearable. Not just the violence, but the failure. The number of times this could have ended differently. The number of people who had the power to stop it and didn't. The fact that the victim did everything right that he possibly could in his condition and still died. He escaped. He found people who cared enough to call for help. Help arrived, and help handed him back to his killer. The women who tried to intervene were dismissed. Their concerns were brushed aside. Their instincts were ignored. The officers later admitted they didn't want to deal with what they thought was a domestic dispute. That decision cost a child his life. This wasn't a case of no one knowing what was happening. This was a case of people choosing not to look too closely, choosing convenience over responsibility, and choosing to believe a calm adult man over a terrified, injured child. When people talk about Dahmer, they often focus on him as a monster, as something separate from society. But stories like this show that monsters don't act alone. They rely on systems that fail. They rely on authority figures who don't ask questions. They rely on assumptions, biases, and indifference. The most haunting part isn't just that the boy was murdered. It's that he almost lived. He was minutes away from safety. He was surrounded by people who sensed danger. He was in front of officers whose job was to protect him. And all of that slipped away because no one took the time to truly see him as a human being in crisis. That's the part that stays with you. Not just the cruelty of one man, but the knowledge that sometimes survival depends on strangers caring enough to stop, listen, and act. And when they don't, the consequences are irreversible. Imagine being that child, hurt beyond words, finding the courage to escape, believing for just a moment that you were saved, and then realizing you weren't. That is a horror no story needs to exaggerate. The man's name was Anatoly Moskvin. On the surface, there was nothing about him that suggested horror. He lived an ordinary life in Russia, sharing an apartment with his parents. He was known as an intelligent, educated man, deeply interested in history, linguistics, and folklore. To the outside world, he appeared harmless, even eccentric in a scholarly way. No one suspected that behind closed doors, something deeply wrong was happening. Over the course of many years, Moskvin exhumed the bodies of young girls, ranging in age from 3 to 15. He didn't do this once or twice. He did it repeatedly. When authorities finally discovered what he had been doing, they found 26 bodies inside his apartment. Investigators later believed the true number of graves he had desecrated could be far higher, possibly as many as 150. What makes the story even harder to process is how he managed to hide this for so long. Moskvin didn't leave the bodies in an obviously recognizable state. He mummified them using crude methods and dressed them in clothing. He positioned them sitting upright around his home. To anyone who might have glanced at them without looking closely, they appeared to be homemade dolls or mannequins. This is how he managed to live with his parents for over a decade without them realizing what he was keeping in their shared living space. As the collection grew, it still didn't raise suspicion. His parents believed they were harmless creations, odd decorations made by a strange but non-violent son. Inside his own mind, Moskvin believed he was doing something meaningful. He talked to the mummified bodies. He dressed them carefully. He sang songs to them. He played with them. He held birthday parties for them. These weren't isolated actions or moments of confusion. This was a sustained, long-term fantasy that became his reality. The apartment wasn't just a place where he stored bodies. To him, it was a home filled with children who needed him. When questioned, Moskvin admitted that he knew what he was doing was illegal. He understood that society would see it as a crime, but he insisted that he wasn't acting out of malice. He claimed the children called out to him, begging to be saved. According to him, when he read an obituary of a child that spoke to him in this way, he would go to her grave and sleep on it for a night. He believed that if the child wanted to be saved, she would communicate that desire to him. He said he never exhumed a body without receiving permission from the child herself. In his mind, he wasn't stealing bodies, he was rescuing them. This is where the tragedy of the story becomes even more complicated. Moskvin was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. His beliefs, his rituals, and his sense of communication with the dead were rooted in severe mental illness. The voices he heard, the permissions he believed he received, the sense of purpose he felt, all came from a reality that existed only in his mind. That doesn't lessen the horror of what he did, but it does explain how someone could maintain such a double life for so long. He wasn't constantly hiding in fear of being caught. He believed he was doing something necessary, something compassionate, something the children wanted. For years, families mourned their daughters, believing they were resting in peace. Meanwhile, their remains were sitting in an apartment, dressed and arranged like dolls, part of a fantasy that no one else could see. The thought of that alone is enough to make the story unbearable. What's especially unsettling is how close this all was to normal life. This wasn't a remote cabin or an isolated compound. It was an apartment building. Neighbors lived nearby. Parents slept under the same roof. The world continued as usual while something profoundly wrong existed quietly in the background. When the truth finally came out, it shocked not just the community but the world. People struggled to understand how something like this could go unnoticed for so long, how parents could live alongside it, how intelligence and education could coexist with such extreme delusion, how many warning signs might have been missed along the way. This story isn't frightening in the way ghost stories are. There's no jump scare, no mystery to solve. It's frightening because it exposes how fragile the human mind can be, and how easily reality can fracture when mental illness goes untreated. It shows how horror doesn't always come from hatred or cruelty, but sometimes from a twisted version of care and belief. Moskvin believed he was saving children who had been abandoned by the world. In reality, he was violating them and prolonging their family's pain in the worst possible way. That gap between intention and reality is what makes the story so disturbing. It's also a reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like quiet men living with their parents, reading books, going about their days while carrying an inner world no one else can see. And sometimes that inner world is where the real horror lives. That Moskvin case is one of those stories that it doesn't leave you. The fact that his parents lived in the same apartment with 26 mummified bodies for years and had no idea. That's the part that gets me. Which story from today messed with your head the most? Drop the number below. I genuinely want to know which one's going to stick with you. Was it the cabin, the meth lab neighbor, the swimming hole? Let me know. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you, they stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments, and in every one of them, something went wrong, or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.